What if Hollywood's brightest stars were safer on a dangerous movie set than they were in ordinary life? The studios sold glamour, romance, and perfect endings, but real life had no director yelling, "Cut." Some legends survived ruthless producers, wild stunts, and years of fame, only to lose everything in one terrible moment. From highways and airplanes to strange household accidents, these are 45 classic Hollywood stars whose final chapters were more shocking than many of their movies. If you enjoy forgotten Hollywood stories told with facts, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Number 1. James Dean. Few Hollywood images are more haunting than that silver Porsche moving along a California highway on September 30th, 1955. James Dean was only 24, yet East of Eden had already turned him into a sensation, while Rebel Without a Cause and Giant were about to make his legend even larger. That afternoon, he was traveling toward a racing event in Salinas in his Porsche 550 Spider. Near Cholame, California, another vehicle crossed into his path at an intersection. The collision ended the life of one of Hollywood's fastest-rising young actors. What makes the story so eerie is how quickly Dean became bigger after his death. Instead of growing older on screen, he remained permanently young. Leather jacket, restless expression, rebellious stare. His short career produced only 3 major starring films, yet generations later, his face remains everywhere. Hollywood normally needs decades to create an icon. One California highway needed only seconds to create an immortal one. Number 2. Carole Lombard. At the beginning of 1942, America needed morale, and one of Hollywood's funniest and most glamorous actresses volunteered to help provide it. Carole Lombard had just completed a successful war bond drive in Indiana and was eager to return home to her husband, Clark Gable. Instead of taking a slower train back west, she boarded TWA Flight 3. On the evening of January 16th, the aircraft struck Mount Potosi near Las Vegas. Everyone aboard was lost. The news hit Hollywood with extraordinary force. Lombard was only 33 and had become one of screwball comedy's defining stars through movies such as My Man Godfrey and To Be or Not to Be. There was an especially cruel twist. She had been traveling because she was helping the American war effort. Clark Gable was devastated, and her death became one of the tragedies that defined wartime Hollywood. The screen had lost a woman famous for making audiences laugh in an accident that left almost nothing funny about Hollywood's glamorous image. If classic Hollywood history is your thing, hit subscribe before we continue. You're about to hear several stories that are even stranger than the first 2. Number 3. Jayne Mansfield. By 1967, the blonde bombshell image that made her famous had begun changing, but Jayne Mansfield was still instantly recognizable. She had spent years being compared with Marilyn Monroe, appearing in movies, nightclub shows, television programs, and endless newspaper photographs. During the early hours of June 29th, Mansfield was traveling through Louisiana toward New Orleans. The car carrying her struck the rear of a tractor-trailer on U.S. Route 90. The crash became surrounded by gruesome rumors that lasted for decades, many of which were exaggerated or simply false. What is certain is that Mansfield and 2 other adults in the front of the vehicle died. Her 3 children riding in the rear survived. She was only 34. Hollywood had marketed Mansfield as larger than life, dramatic gowns, publicity stunts, luxury cars, enormous parties. Yet her final journey happened on an ordinary dark road. The accident also became part of American road safety history, helping draw attention to underride dangers involving trailers. Her movies may belong to another era, but the circumstances of her death remain unforgettable. Number 4. Grace Kelly. For years, her life looked like a fairy tale Hollywood could never have invented. Grace Kelly went from starring opposite Gary Cooper, Cary Grant, and James Stewart to leaving the film industry and marrying Prince Rainier III of Monaco. Then came September 13, 1982. While driving along a steep road in Monaco with her daughter Stephanie, Kelly suffered what doctors described as a cerebral hemorrhage. The car went off the roadway and down the hillside. Stephanie survived the crash with injuries. Her mother did not. The former Oscar-winning actress died the following night after doctors determined that her condition could not be reversed. She was 52. The tragedy seemed particularly shocking because Kelly's public image had always represented control and elegance. Hitchcock had turned that calm exterior into cinematic perfection in Rear Window, Dial M for Murder, and To Catch a Thief. After 17 years as a princess, one of Hollywood's most polished stars was suddenly gone because of a medical emergency that occurred at the worst possible moment, while she was driving on a dangerous mountain road. Number 5. Will Rogers. Long before movie stars became social media celebrities, Will Rogers was something even bigger. An entertainer almost the entire country seemed to know. His jokes appeared in newspapers, his voice came through radio sets, and his films made him one of the most popular personalities of the Depression era. Aviation fascinated him, and in August 1935, he joined legendary pilot Wiley Post on a journey through Alaska. On August 15th, their aircraft took off near Point Barrow. Almost immediately, something went terribly wrong. The plane crashed, killing both men. America reacted as if it had lost a national relative. Flags were lowered, tributes filled newspapers, and thousands of movie theaters later observed a period of silence. Rogers had made a career out of gently mocking politicians and human behavior. His appeal crossed political and regional lines in a way very few entertainers ever manage. He had traveled constantly and embraced the new age of aviation. In the end, that enthusiasm carried him into one of the most famous aviation tragedies of the 1930s. Number 6. Audie Murphy. Coming home from war had already seemed almost impossible for Audie Murphy. He became one of America's most decorated soldiers of World War II, while still astonishingly young, then somehow reinvented himself as a Hollywood star. Westerns and war pictures made his face familiar to millions. In To Hell and Back, he even portrayed a version of his own wartime story. But on May 28, 1971, Murphy was aboard a private aircraft traveling through Virginia. Rain, clouds, fog, and mountainous terrain created dangerous flying conditions. The plane struck Brush Mountain, northwest of Roanoke. Everyone aboard was killed. Murphy was only 45. The ending carried painful irony. This was a man who had survived circumstances most people could barely imagine, returned from battle, confronted the pressures of fame, and built another career in an unpredictable industry. It was not combat that finally took him. It was an ordinary civilian flight through bad weather. His grave at Arlington National Cemetery later became one of the cemetery's most frequently visited sites, a reminder that behind the movie star image stood an extraordinary and complicated American life. Number 7. Judy Garland. Behind the voice that made Over the Rainbow immortal was a life far less magical than The Wizard of Oz. Judy Garland had been working since childhood, and the studio system placed enormous demands on her body, schedule, and emotions. By the late 1960s, she remained beloved but struggled personally and professionally. Then, on June 22, 1969, Garland was found unresponsive at her London home. The official finding described her death as an accidental barbiturate overdose, an incautious self-overdosage, rather than evidence of deliberate intent. She was 47. The tragedy was especially bitter because Garland had spent much of her career surrounded by medication used to manage sleep, energy, and relentless working schedules. What seemed normal inside old Hollywood could create consequences lasting decades. Her final years were difficult, but her talent never disappeared. Audiences still wanted the voice, the vulnerability, and the enormous emotional power. Few Hollywood stories reveal the darker cost of stardom more clearly. The little girl who once sang about somewhere beyond the rainbow ultimately became one of the clearest warnings about what fame could demand from a human being. Number 8. William Holden. Nothing about the setting sounded especially dangerous. There was no airplane, no movie stunt, and no speeding sports car. William Holden was inside his Santa Monica apartment when an ordinary fall turned fatal. The Oscar-winning star of Sunset Boulevard, Stalag 17, The Bridge on the River Kwai, and Network had spent decades playing men who seemed tough, cynical, and difficult to destroy. In November 1981, investigators concluded that Holden had slipped or fallen, struck his head on a piece of furniture, and suffered a serious wound. Alcohol intoxication was also reported as a contributing circumstance. He apparently remained alone after the accident and died before receiving help. The discovery came days later. That lonely ending contrasted sharply with Holden's enormous screen presence. He had worked with Billy Wilder, David Lean, Blake Edwards, and Sam Peckinpah. He had been one of Hollywood's dependable leading men through several generations. Yet there was no dramatic final scene. A household accident, the kind people might normally walk away from, became fatal because no one was there at the critical moment. Number 9. Natalie Wood Few. Cases on this list require more careful wording. Natalie Wood's death was initially classified as an accidental drowning, but decades later, officials amended the cause to drowning and other undetermined factors. That means her case cannot honestly be described today as a completely settled accident. Wood had been famous since childhood, graduating from Miracle on 34th Street to adult classics including Rebel Without a Cause, West Side Story, and Splendor in the Grass. During Thanksgiving weekend in November 1981, she was aboard the yacht Splendor near California's Catalina Island with husband Robert Wagner, actor Christopher Walken, and Captain Dennis Davin. Sometime during the night, she disappeared from the vessel. Her body was discovered in the water the following morning. Questions about arguments, timelines, bruising, the yacht's dinghy, and conflicting memories kept the story alive for decades. What can safely be said is that Wood drowned under circumstances authorities eventually decided were not fully explainable. Her death remains one of Hollywood's most famous unresolved mysteries, and any version claiming to know exactly what happened goes beyond the established evidence. Number 10. Alan Ladd. For audiences who remember classic westerns, the image is almost impossible to separate from Shane. Alan Ladd's quiet voice, controlled acting style, and compact screen presence made him one of Hollywood's biggest male stars of the 1940s and 1950s. By January 1964, however, his life had become more troubled. Ladd was found dead at his home at the age of 50. The coroner concluded that a combination of alcohol, a barbiturate, and tranquilizing medication caused his death. Importantly, the ruling was accidental. Reports noted that he struggled with insomnia and used medication to sleep. None of the substances necessarily told the whole story by itself. It was their interaction that became dangerous. That distinction makes the case especially sobering. Nothing about the evening sounded like the dramatic ending of a movie hero. One of Hollywood's most famous tough guys was lost not to a gunfight or a Western showdown, but to substances commonly associated with sleep and relaxation. The man who rode away so memorably at the end of Shane never received anything close to such a perfectly scripted farewell in real life. Number 11. Vic Morrow. A film set is supposed to create the illusion of danger while keeping performers protected. In the early hours of July 23, 1982, that basic promise failed catastrophically during production of Twilight Zone, the movie. Vic Morrow, already well known from the television series Combat, was filming a nighttime sequence involving explosions, water, a helicopter, and 2 child performers. During the complicated shot, an explosive effect damaged the low-flying helicopter. The aircraft lost control and crashed into the area where Morrow and the children were performing. All 3 were killed. The accident became one of the most notorious moments in Hollywood production history. Public attention quickly moved beyond Morrow's death to questions about child labor rules, nighttime filming, stunt coordination, special effects, and whether the scene had been unnecessarily dangerous. Legal proceedings continued for years, and the case became a major reference point whenever Hollywood discussed set safety. Morrow had spent decades pretending to survive warfare, crime, and television danger. The bitter irony was that the artificial battlefield of a movie set became the place where the danger was no longer artificial. His death remains one of Hollywood's strongest reminders that spectacular footage is never worth ignoring basic safety. Number 12. Tom Mix. Before John Wayne became the face of the Western, Tom Mix had already turned the movie cowboy into a national hero. His enormous hat, elaborate costumes, horseback stunts, and action-filled silent films made him one of early Hollywood's first true superstars. By 1940, his peak movie years were behind him, but his name still represented the mythology of the American West. On October 12th, Mix was driving his powerful Cord automobile through Arizona. Traveling at high speed, he encountered roadwork and lost control. The car left the roadway, rolled, and came to rest in a dry wash. The accident was fatal. There was something almost cinematic about the location: open Arizona country, a famous cowboy, and an expensive automobile speeding across the landscape. But unlike one of Mix's films, there was no stunt team waiting outside the camera frame. His career had been built around convincing audiences that a cowboy hero could survive almost anything. Modern viewers may not watch Tom Mix as often as later Western stars, yet his influence is enormous. His final accident closed the story of one of Hollywood's original action heroes at the precise moment automobiles were replacing the horse-dominated world his films had helped romanticize. Number 13. Linda Darnell. Some Hollywood tragedies become more painful because they begin during completely ordinary evenings. Linda Darnell was staying at a friend's home in Glenview, Illinois, in April 1965, when fire suddenly transformed the house into a dangerous trap. The actress had once been one of 20th Century Fox's most striking stars. Her films included Blood and Sand, Forever Amber, A Letter to Three Wives, and My Darling Clementine. During the fire, Darnell was upstairs. Smoke and intense heat prevented an easy escape, and although rescuers eventually got her out, she had suffered severe burns. She died the following day at the age of 41. The story gained an additional sad detail because reports said the group had been watching one of Darnell's own older movies on television that night. A glamorous screen image from years earlier was appearing in the same house where her real life was moving toward tragedy. Her career had already experienced ups and downs, but she was still working and exploring possible new opportunities. Instead, a domestic fire, not a studio scandal or career collapse, brought the life of one of the 1940s most memorable faces to an abrupt end. Number 14. Ernie Kovac's comedy looked different after Ernie Kovacs appeared on television. Instead of merely pointing a camera at performers, he experimented with visual tricks, surreal sketches, strange characters, and technical ideas that influenced generations of television comedians. Then, late on January 13, 1962, an everyday drive ended his career instantly. Los Angeles roads were wet from rain when Kovacs lost control of his Chevrolet Corvair while making a turn. The car struck a power pole. He died at the scene at only 42. The timing was cruel. Kovacs had spent years pushing television into new creative territory and was finally receiving broader recognition for how original his work had been. His widow, actress and singer Edie Adams, was left not only with personal grief, but also significant financial complications that became part of the story after his death. Today, some viewers may not immediately recognize his name, but television historians regularly point to his work as decades ahead of its time. A comedian fascinated by cameras, machinery, editing, and technical invention ultimately died inside another piece of modern machinery. One wet road ended experiments that could have reshaped television for many more years. Number 15. Janet Gaynor. The first woman ever to win the Academy Award for Best Actress survived the initial crash. That is what makes Janet Gaynor's story different from many others here. In September 1982, Gaynor was riding in a taxi in San Francisco with her husband, producer Paul Gregory, actress Mary Martin, and Martin's manager when their vehicle was struck in a serious traffic collision. Gaynor suffered major injuries, including broken ribs and internal damage. She endured surgeries and a difficult recovery. For a time, it appeared she had survived, but the accident had changed her health permanently. Gaynor experienced continuing medical complications, and on September 14, 1984, almost exactly 2 years later, she died at the age of 77. Her physician and later reports connected the death to complications stemming from those crash injuries. For movie historians, Gaynor represented Hollywood's transition from silent cinema into sound. Her performance in Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, remains one of silent film's most celebrated. The tragedy proves that an accident does not always claim its victim immediately. Sometimes a person walks away, fights for months or years, and still never truly escapes what happened in those few violent seconds. Number 16. Robert Walker. Only months after giving perhaps the greatest performance of his career, Robert Walker was gone. Movie audiences knew him especially well as the charming but frightening Bruno Anthony in Alfred Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train. Off-screen, however, Walker had experienced periods of severe emotional distress and problems with alcohol. On August 28, 1951, doctors were called after Walker became highly agitated. A physician administered the sedative amobarbitol in an attempt to calm him. The problem was that Walker had also consumed alcohol. According to accounts of the incident, the combination caused him to lose consciousness and stop breathing. Attempts to revive him failed. He was only 32. The tragedy is particularly striking because the medicine was not being given with the intention of harming him. It was supposed to calm a difficult situation. Walker had already demonstrated how powerful his acting could be, and Strangers on a Train suggested his career might have entered an extraordinary new phase. Instead, one dangerous interaction between alcohol and a sedative ended that possibility almost immediately after audiences had seen what may have been his finest work. Hollywood lost an actor just when Hitchcock had revealed how much more complicated and unsettling he could be. Number 17. Jeffrey Hunter. To millions of Western fans, Jeffrey Hunter will always be the handsome young Martin Pauly beside John Wayne in The Searchers. Science fiction audiences also remember him as Captain Christopher Pike in the original pilot for Star Trek. His final months, however, were filled with frightening physical incidents. While working overseas in 1968, Hunter was reportedly injured during filming involving an explosion. Later health problems followed. Back in California the next year, he suffered an intracranial hemorrhage. Then came the final accident. At his home in May 1969, Hunter fell and struck his head. The resulting skull injury proved fatal, and he died on May 27th at only 42. Because several medical problems and earlier injuries surrounded his death, the story sometimes becomes confused when retold. What remains clear is that the final fall caused severe trauma from which he did not recover. Hunter had possessed the kind of face Hollywood could use in almost any genre: Western, war picture, biblical epic, romance, or science fiction. He had already played Jesus in King of Kings and stood beside John Wayne in one of cinema's greatest westerns. A career built around physical adventure ended not during a spectacular movie sequence, but after a fall inside his own home. Number 18. Brandon DeWilde. Anyone who remembers the ending of Shane remembers the child calling after the mysterious gunfighter as he rides away. That child was Brandon DeWilde, one of the most talented young actors of 1950s Hollywood. Unlike many child performers, DeWilde managed to keep acting as he grew older. He appeared in films such as HUD with Paul Newman and continued working on stage and television. On July 6, 1972, everything ended on a Colorado roadway. DeWilde was driving in the Denver area when his vehicle left the road and struck a guardrail and a parked truck. The crash caused devastating injuries, and he died shortly afterward. He was only 30. There is a painful cinematic echo in the story. In Shane, DeWilde's character watches an adult hero disappear into the distance while desperately calling him back. In real life, the young performer himself disappeared far too early. His Academy Award nomination for Shane had come when he was still a boy, placing him among Hollywood's most impressive child performers. Had he lived, he might have spent decades developing into a strong character actor. Instead, audiences are left watching his childhood performances while knowing the adult career was cut short on an ordinary summer drive. Number 19. Buck Jones' Saturday Night at Boston's Coconut Grove nightclub was supposed to be an evening of entertainment. Instead, November 28, 1942, became the date of one of America's worst nightclub disasters. Among those inside was Western movie star Buck Jones. During the silent era and early sound period, Jones had become one of Hollywood's great cowboy heroes. His films attracted huge audiences, especially young fans who viewed him as a symbol of courage and toughness. When fire raced through the Coconut Grove, smoke, flames, overcrowding, and problems with exits created chaos. Jones was badly injured. He survived the initial night, but died 2 days later. For years, stories circulated that he had heroically gone back inside to rescue people. Those accounts helped strengthen his legend, although historians have questioned some of the more dramatic versions. The confirmed truth is tragic enough. A man whose films repeatedly showed him escaping danger became one of the hundreds affected by a real disaster that moved far faster than movie danger ever could. The Coconut Grove fire later influenced changes in safety rules, emergency exits, and building practices. For Western fans, however, the disaster also marked the end of one of the genre's major pre-war stars. Number 20. Margaret Sullivan. Her acting style was quiet, intelligent, and emotionally direct. Margaret Sullivan never needed the exaggerated glamour associated with some Golden Age stars. In movies such as The Shop Around the Corner and Three Comrades, vulnerability was part of what made her unforgettable. By the end of the 1950s, however, her personal life had become difficult. Hearing problems had also complicated her career. On January 1, 1960, Sullivan was found unconscious after taking prescribed medication. She died at 50. Because of the circumstances, speculation naturally appeared. Yet the county coroner officially ruled that her death resulted from an accidental barbiturate overdose. That official finding matters, because later retellings sometimes blur the difference between suspicion and evidence. Sullivan's story also reflects a recurring pattern in old Hollywood. Powerful sedating medications were widely available, and the dangerous interaction of dosage, exhaustion, health conditions, and other substances was not always understood by the public as clearly as it is today. Her career had never depended on spectacle. Even opposite James Stewart, she could make the smallest emotional reaction feel enormous. The final tragedy was equally quiet. No dramatic crash, no movie set, no public scene, only medication, a private room, and a life ending far too early. Number 21. Robert Francis. Sometimes Hollywood gives an actor 20 years to become famous. Robert Francis needed only a handful of films to convince Columbia Pictures that he might become a major star. His breakthrough came in The Caine Mutiny, where he appeared alongside Humphrey Bogart, José Ferrer, and Van Johnson. More leading roles quickly followed. Then, on July 31, 1955, Francis climbed into a small aircraft at Burbank, California. He was a licensed pilot and was flying the plane himself. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft experienced trouble and crashed. Francis and the other people aboard were killed. He was 25. The timing was extraordinary. His entire released film career amounted to only 4 movies. Columbia had been preparing additional projects, and Francis seemed positioned to become one of the studio's dependable young leading men. Instead, his life ended only weeks before James Dean would suffer his own fatal accident. That makes 1955 an especially grim year for Hollywood's emerging male stars. Francis never received enough time for audiences to decide what kind of actor he might become. He remains frozen at the beginning of his career, a handsome young naval officer in one of the 1950s biggest films, forever carrying the promise of movies that were never made. Number 22. Thelma Todd. At first glance, the official explanation seemed simple. Thelma Todd was discovered dead inside her car in a garage near her Los Angeles restaurant in December 1935. Carbon monoxide poisoning was identified as the cause. A grand jury investigation eventually supported an accidental explanation, yet almost immediately, people began asking questions. Todd had been one of Hollywood's most recognizable comedy actresses, working with stars including the Marx Brothers, Laurel and Hardy, and Buster Keaton. She also operated the popular Sidewalk Cafe, which brought her into contact with a wide range of Hollywood and nightlife personalities. Reports about arguments, threats, injuries, and inconsistencies surrounding her final hours created decades of speculation. None of that speculation proves another person caused her death. That distinction is important. The historical record supports saying that authorities ultimately treated the case as accidental, while also acknowledging that circumstances left enough unanswered questions to keep the mystery alive. Todd was only 29. Her blonde screen image had been cheerful, sophisticated, and funny. The contrast between those comedies and the lonely garage where she was found could hardly have been greater. Nearly a century later, her films survive, but so does the question that has followed her name since 1935. Was the official explanation really the whole story? Number 23. Olive Thomas. Long before the Hollywood scandals of the 1920s became legendary, Olive Thomas was already living the kind of glamorous life magazines love to describe. She had been a Ziegfeld Follies beauty, model, and silent film star. In 1920, Thomas and her husband, actor Jack Pickford, traveled to Paris. One night, Inside their hotel, she accidentally swallowed a toxic mercury compound that had been kept as medication. The substance was highly poisonous. Thomas became seriously ill and was taken to a hospital where doctors attempted to save her. She died several days later, on September 10, at approximately 25 years old. Because the couple had a turbulent relationship, and because newspapers were already hungry for scandal, rumors immediately surrounded the death. Investigators, however, treated the poisoning as accidental. The incident became one of Hollywood's earliest sensational celebrity tragedies. Thomas had been part of a young movie industry still inventing the idea of the film star. Suddenly, that same industry discovered another modern phenomenon, the celebrity death story, complete with rumors, headlines, speculation, and public fascination. Her films are far less familiar today than her tragic ending, yet in the early 1920s, losing Olive Thomas was comparable to seeing one of the industry's brightest rising stars disappear before audiences had even adjusted to her fame. Number 24. Martha Mansfield. A period costume can look beautiful under movie lights, but the fabrics used in early filmmaking could also be dangerously flammable. Martha Mansfield learned that in the most terrible way imaginable. In November 1923, the young actress was working on the Civil War drama The Warrens of Virginia. After completing scenes, she was sitting in a car while still wearing an elaborate costume. Suddenly, the dress caught fire. Contemporary accounts generally blamed a match or smoking material, although exactly how the flame reached the costume remained uncertain. Co-workers rushed to help and managed to extinguish the fire, but Mansfield had already suffered severe burns. She died the following day. She was 24. Early Hollywood is often remembered romantically: hand-cranked cameras, silent stars, enormous studio lots, and fearless performers inventing a new art form. Safety standards, however, were primitive compared with modern productions. Highly flammable costumes, powerful lights, open flames, unregulated stunts, and improvised working conditions created risks audiences rarely saw. Mansfield had been steadily building her career and had appeared in numerous silent productions. Her death became another warning from an era when actors were helping create cinematic magic, while sometimes working in environments where a single spark could turn that magic into a real emergency. Number 25. Dorothy Dell Hollywood had barely learned her name when the story was already over. Dorothy Dell arrived in movies after success as a beauty pageant winner and stage performer. Paramount Pictures quickly saw potential in her combination of glamour, comedy, and musical talent. Her appearance opposite Shirley Temple in Little Miss Marker helped place her in front of a huge audience. Then came June 8, 1934. After attending a social gathering, Dell was riding in an automobile when the vehicle crashed. She suffered fatal injuries. She was only 19 years old. That age makes her career almost difficult to comprehend. Most performers are still learning their profession at 19. Dell had already appeared in major studio productions and seemed positioned for much bigger opportunities. Paramount had plans for her, and newspapers had begun presenting her as one of Hollywood's promising new personalities. The accident erased those plans instantly. Her death also belonged to a period when automobile culture was expanding rapidly, while road engineering, vehicle construction, and safety equipment remained far behind modern standards. Today, Little Miss Marker is mainly remembered as an important Shirley Temple film. Watch it again, however, and Dell's presence becomes bittersweet. The confident young actress on screen had no idea that her Hollywood story would end before the movie industry had even discovered how famous she might become. Number 26. Robert Harron. A strange hotel room accident ended the career of an actor who had been closely connected with director D.W. Griffith and some of silent cinema's most historically significant films. Robert Harron had appeared in The Birth of a Nation, Intolerance, and numerous other Griffith productions. In September 1920, while staying in a New York hotel, Harron suffered a gunshot wound. According to the account he gave at the time, a firearm discharged accidentally while he was handling or removing it among his belongings. The wound initially did not appear certain to be fatal, and Harron reportedly remained conscious. Complications followed. He died on September 5 at the age of 27. Because of timing and reported career disappointments, later writers sometimes suggested the shooting may have been intentional. Harron himself denied that explanation and the official account treated the incident as an accident. As with Thelma Todd, separating documented fact from later theory matters. Harron had been acting since adolescence and effectively grew up inside Griffith's filmmaking operation. At an age when many actors are only beginning, he already possessed an enormous silent film resume. His death, therefore, did more than remove a young performer. It ended one of the closest personal links between Griffith's early studio family and the next era of Hollywood that was beginning to emerge. Number 27. Florence Labadie. Before Mary Pickford completely dominated the image of the American silent film actress, Florence Labadie had been one of the most recognizable women working before movie cameras. Her popularity came largely through the Thanhouser Company, where she appeared in dramas, serials, and literary adaptations. Then an automobile journey changed everything. On August 28, 1917, Labadie was driving near Ossining, New York, when the brakes reportedly failed. The vehicle went down an embankment and overturned. Her companion survived with less severe injuries, but Labadie suffered serious fractures and other trauma. For weeks, doctors believed she might recover. Instead, complications developed. Infection set in, and on October 13 she died. She was 29. The accident illustrates something easy to forget when watching silent movies today. Automobiles themselves were still relatively new technology. Driving could be adventurous, unpredictable, and far more dangerous than modern audiences imagine. Labadie had reportedly appeared in well over 100 films. At the time of her death, she was not a forgotten supporting actress, but a genuine screen celebrity. Because so much silent cinema has been lost, modern viewers cannot fully experience how familiar her face once was. Her final car journey therefore erased not just a promising future, but one of early American cinema's established stars at the height of her popularity. Number 28. Thomas Gomez. Character actors rarely receive the publicity of leading men, yet some become so distinctive that a film seems incomplete without them. Thomas Gomez belonged to that group. His heavy presence and powerful voice made him ideal for villains, authority figures, and complicated supporting characters. Gomez appeared in films including Force of Evil, Ride the Pink Horse, and Key Largo. His performance in Ride the Pink Horse earned him an Academy Award nomination for supporting actor, an unusually significant achievement for a character performer of his era. In 1971, his life was interrupted by a serious automobile accident. Gomez survived the initial crash, but never recovered from his injuries. After spending approximately 3 weeks in a coma, he died on June 18 at the age of 65. The delayed death made the tragedy less dramatic in newspaper headlines than an instant fatal crash, but no less devastating. Gomez had built the sort of career Hollywood depends upon, but rarely celebrates enough. Dozens of roles, dependable professionalism, and the ability to make even modest screen time memorable. There was no final leading man farewell, and no giant studio tribute. Instead, an ordinary traffic accident quietly ended more than 3 decades of stage, film, and television work. For classic movie fans, his face still appears unexpectedly in old films, another reminder of how many familiar Hollywood personalities disappeared through accidents far away from studio cameras. Number 29. Bonar Colliano. The theatre performance was finished, the audience had gone home, and Bonar Colliano was driving away from Liverpool. Nothing suggested the next few minutes would become the last scene of his life. Born in America but strongly associated with British cinema, Colliano built a career playing fast-talking Americans in films including A Matter of Life and Death and The Way to the Stars. On August 17, 1958, he was driving a Jaguar XK140 through Birkenhead after appearing in a stage production. The car crashed. Colliano suffered fatal injuries and died at 34. His passenger survived. The accident shocked colleagues because his career had been active and varied. He moved easily among British films, American productions, and theatre work, making him one of those transatlantic performers audiences recognized even when they could not immediately remember the name. His family also belonged deeply to show business, meaning the tragedy spread through a wider performing dynasty. There is something particularly sad about accidents occurring immediately after a performance. Minutes earlier, a performer has been standing beneath bright lights while an audience watches every movement. Then the curtain falls. The ordinary world returns, and the protections of the stage vanish. Colliano's death happened in exactly that transition, from theatrical illusion back into everyday reality, where a road and an automobile could be far more dangerous than anything scripted for him on screen. Number 30. Eric Fleming. Long before Clint Eastwood became an international movie star, television viewers of Rawhide originally knew Eric Fleming as trail boss Gil Favor. Tall, commanding, and experienced, Fleming was one of the main reasons the Western series worked. His departure eventually gave Eastwood more room to emerge, but Fleming continued pursuing acting opportunities. In 1966, he traveled to Peru to work on the television adventure High Jungle. The production required filming on the Huallaga River. On September 28, Fleming and co-star Nico Minados were traveling in a dugout canoe when it overturned in dangerous water. Minados managed to reach safety. Fleming disappeared into the river and drowned. He was 41. His death demonstrated how location filming could create risks very different from studio work. Hollywood productions increasingly wanted authentic jungles, rivers, deserts, and mountains. Authentic scenery, however, meant authentic danger. Fleming had once survived a serious accident while serving in the Navy, and later built himself into a working actor through persistence. After years of simulated cattle drives and television hazards, a real river proved unforgiving. The tragedy also left Rawhide fans looking differently at earlier episodes. Gil Favor always appeared to be the dependable man guiding everyone else safely through unpredictable country. Off-screen, Fleming's own final journey into difficult terrain had no television rescue waiting at the end. Number 31. Gloria Dickson. The danger began with something painfully small. Gloria Dickson, an actress best remembered for Warner Brothers dramas of the late 1930s and early 1940s, was inside her Los Angeles home on April 10, 1945, when fire broke out. Investigators concluded that an improperly extinguished cigarette had ignited furniture. The flames spread. Dickson became trapped and died from the effects of the fire. She was only 27. Her career had started with enormous promise. After performing on stage, she was cast opposite Claude Rains in They Won't Forget, a serious drama that immediately attracted attention to her talent. More films followed, but Hollywood careers can change quickly, and by the mid-1940s, she was no longer receiving the same level of roles. There might still have been decades to rebuild. Instead, a household object caused a fire that erased every future possibility in one afternoon. Old Hollywood houses often appear impossibly glamorous in photographs. Cocktail bars, elegant furniture, heavy curtains, upholstered chairs, and stars relaxing with cigarettes. Those same interiors could also become highly combustible environments. Dickson's death is therefore among the most ordinary and disturbing accidents on this list. There was no risky stunt or reckless expedition. The threat existed inside the familiar surroundings of home, where almost nobody expects a fatal Hollywood story to begin. Number 32. Marie McDonald Hollywood publicity departments gave her one of the era's most direct nicknames, the Body. Marie McDonald became famous less for one defining movie than for an image built through photographs, nightclub appearances, marriages, headlines, and studio publicity. Behind the glamorous image, however, her personal life was turbulent. On October 21, 1965, McDonald was found dead at her home. Investigators detected a mixture of medications in her system. Because her life had involved previous personal crises, questions naturally arose about whether the death had been deliberate. The final official classification treated it as an accidental multiple drug intoxication. She was 42. Her death demonstrated another uncomfortable part of mid-century Hollywood culture. Sedatives, sleeping medication, painkillers, and alcohol could overlap in the lives of exhausted performers, sometimes with fatal consequences. McDonald had spent years being photographed as an almost exaggerated symbol of Hollywood glamour. Yet photographs rarely showed anxiety, insomnia, physical pain, or emotional pressure. The contrast between the publicity image and the private reality is what makes her story endure. Hollywood could create a nickname that turned a human being into a perfect visual product. What it could not do was make the person behind that product invulnerable. A combination that may have seemed manageable on its own became the final accidental event in a life already filled with dramatic headlines. Number 33. Gia Scala. Audiences watching The Guns of Navarone may remember Gia Scala as the complicated Greek resistance fighter Anna. Her dark beauty and European background gave her a distinctive presence at a time when Hollywood was searching for international-looking stars. Success, however, did not bring stability. Scala experienced serious personal difficulties, and her career became increasingly inconsistent during the 1960s. On April 30, 1972, she was found dead at her Hollywood Hills home. Los Angeles County authorities concluded that she had died from an accidental combination involving alcohol and barbiturates. She was 38. As with several performers on this list, later storytelling can turn a complicated life into a simple tragedy. Reality was more nuanced. Scala had achieved something extraordinary by reaching major Hollywood productions, but fame did not eliminate private struggles. Her appearance in The Guns of Navarone placed her beside Gregory Peck, David Niven, and Anthony Quinn in one of the era's most successful adventure films. That single role might have become the foundation of a much longer international career. Instead, her later years moved in the opposite direction. Scala's death belongs to a recurring and uncomfortable chapter of Hollywood history. Talented performers, surrounded by substances that were legal, widely prescribed, and potentially dangerous when mixed. The glamorous portraits survive. The private cost behind them is harder to see. Number 34. Albert Dekker. Few endings in Hollywood history generated stranger headlines. Albert Dekker was a respected character actor whose career stretched from Dr. Cyclops and the Killers to Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch. He had also entered politics and served in the California State Assembly. In May 1968, Dekker was found dead inside his Hollywood home under highly unusual circumstances. The scene initially caused enormous speculation because of its bizarre appearance. Investigators found no convincing evidence that another person was responsible, and authorities eventually classified the death as accidental, involving asphyxiation. Dekker was 62. For a performer who had spent decades portraying sinister, mysterious, and sometimes threatening characters, his real-life ending seemed almost too strange for a screenplay. Yet repeating sensational details can easily obscure the important factual point. The official investigation did not establish murder. His final released film, The Wild Bunch, appeared after his death and became one of the most influential westerns ever made. That gave Dekker an unusual cinematic farewell. While audiences were discovering one of the strongest films of his career, the actor himself had already become the subject of one of Hollywood's most whispered-about tragedies. The mystery surrounding the scene remains memorable, but the official conclusion places his death among the industry's strangest fatal accidents. Number 35. Orma Locklear movie stunts were very different when Hollywood had almost no established safety system. Orma Locklear was not merely pretending to be a daring aviator. He was one. After becoming famous for walking on the wings of airplanes and performing extraordinary aerial demonstrations, he brought those skills into motion pictures. In 1920, Locklear was filming The Skywayman. The climactic sequence required him to dive his aircraft at night toward the ground, while powerful lights illuminated the scene. According to historical accounts, the lights were supposed to be switched off at a specific moment so he could see clearly enough to pull out of the dive. That did not happen as planned. The aircraft struck the ground, killing Locklear and his fellow pilot Milton Elliott. Locklear was 28. Even more astonishingly, footage connected with the crash was reportedly retained for the finished film and promoted as part of its realism. That detail reveals how differently early Hollywood sometimes regarded danger. Today, a fatal production accident immediately raises questions about safety, responsibility, and whether any shot justified the risk. A century ago, studios could still treat real danger as part of the attraction. Locklear had made a career by doing things audiences believed no reasonable person would attempt. Eventually, the line between spectacular entertainment and unacceptable danger disappeared completely. Number 36. Bobby Weezer Hutchins. Millions of viewers grew up watching the children of Our Gang, later widely known through The Little Rascals. Among the familiar early faces was Bobby Hutchins, nicknamed Weezer. Child stardom, however, did not become an adult Hollywood career. After leaving the series, Hutchins lived a much more ordinary life and eventually joined the U.S. Army Air Forces during World War II. He entered aviation training. On May 17, 1945, only days after victory had been declared in Europe, Hutchins was participating in a training exercise near Merced, California. Two aircraft collided in mid-air. The accident killed Hutchins at only 20 years old. The timing was painfully cruel. The war in Europe had effectively ended, and the entire country was beginning to imagine servicemen returning home. For our gang viewers, Hutchins had been permanently preserved as a small boy on film. His death meant he would never get the long adult life audiences might have assumed waited beyond those childhood shorts. Many child stars struggle when fame disappears. Hutchins had already moved into a completely different chapter. Instead of becoming another Hollywood cautionary tale about failed stardom, he became the victim of a military training accident. The screen kept Weezer young forever, long before nostalgia turned The Little Rascals into television staples for generations of later viewers. Number 37. Janice Logan Hollywood sometimes loses track of its stars before tragedy arrives. Janice Logan entered films in the late 1930s and appeared opposite established performers, including W.C. Fields. Her screen career, however, lasted only a few years. Rather than spending decades chasing diminishing roles, she largely stepped away from filmmaking. Then, in October 1965, Logan died in a house fire in Glendale, California. She was 48. The fact that she had already left Hollywood meant the tragedy received far less long-term attention than deaths involving stars who remained constantly in newspapers. Yet her films preserve a recognizable face from the period when studios introduced new actors at an astonishing rate. Hollywood in the 1930s and 1940s could manufacture a performer's public identity very quickly. The moment a contract disappeared, that identity could vanish almost as fast. Logan's later privacy therefore makes her death feel particularly distant. There were no cameras documenting her final years, no enormous publicity machine maintaining her fame, and no mythology like the stories surrounding James Dean or Carole Lombard. Only the basic facts remain: a former Hollywood actress, a private life after the movies, and a residential fire that brought that life to a sudden end. Sometimes forgotten Hollywood is not forgotten because the performer lacked talent. Time simply moved on before audiences realized an entire story had vanished with it. Number 38. Evelyn Bostock. Not every fatal Hollywood accident involved spectacular machinery. Sometimes the danger came from products that were once used far more casually than anyone would accept today. Evelyn Bostock, an English-born actress who worked in American films, died in November 1944 from accidental carbon tetrachloride poisoning. Carbon tetrachloride was once commonly used in cleaning products and other household or industrial applications before its severe health dangers became widely recognized. For modern audiences, that can make the accident difficult to imagine. People living in the first half of the 20th century routinely encountered chemicals that later generations would handle with far greater caution. Bostock was only 46. Her acting career never reached the level of Lombard or Kelly, but she had worked during a period when Hollywood was expanding internationally and drawing performers from Britain, Europe, and beyond. Her story is a reminder that accident can mean much more than a collision or fall. Changing safety knowledge has prevented many types of deaths that were once frighteningly possible. Products could be sold, stored, inhaled, or used without the warnings familiar today. Bostock's name may now be obscure outside serious classic film circles, but the circumstances of her death reveal an entire forgotten category of everyday risk, one created not by reckless behavior, but by a world that had not yet learned how dangerous some ordinary chemicals could be. Number 39. Charles Emmett Mack. Sometimes reality produces irony so precise that it sounds invented. Charles Emmett Mack had risen from working behind the scenes for director D.W. Griffith to becoming an actor in Griffith Productions. By the mid-1920s, his career was developing rapidly. Warner Bros. Then cast him in The First Auto, a film centered on the arrival of the automobile and the conflict between old transportation and the new machine age. On March 17, 1927, Mack was traveling toward a racetrack in Riverside, California, where he was expected to work on an automobile racing sequence for the picture. He never arrived, The car he was driving collided with another vehicle and overturned. Mack was killed at 26. The coincidence seems almost unbearably cruel. An actor heading to film a movie about automobiles died in an automobile accident. His background made the loss even more dramatic. Mack had reportedly begun around Griffith's studio, doing minor jobs before attracting the director's attention and moving in front of the camera. Hollywood loves stories about assistants becoming stars. Mack was living one of those stories when it suddenly stopped. The first auto survives as a historical curiosity, from the transition between silent cinema and synchronized sound. Behind it sits a much sadder history, the young leading man who died while traveling to help complete it. Number 40. Tamara Drassin. One song alone would have been enough to secure her place in entertainment history. Tamara Drassin introduced Smoke Gets in Your Eyes in the 1933 Broadway musical Roberta. She also introduced other songs that became standards, while building a career as a singer and actress. During World War II, she joined performers traveling overseas to entertain military personnel. On February 22, 1943, Drassin was aboard Pan American's famous Yankee Clipper flying boat as it approached Lisbon, Portugal. The aircraft crashed while attempting to land on the Tagus River. Drassin was among those killed. Singer Jane Froman, who was also aboard, survived with serious injuries. According to later accounts, Froman had exchanged seating arrangements with Drassin before the crash, a fact that deeply affected her afterward. The disaster became important enough that Froman's life and recovery were later dramatized in With a Song in My Heart. Drassin's own story received far less attention. That seems unfair, considering how permanently her voice had entered American popular music. Through songs, audiences continued singing long after her death. She had traveled overseas to entertain during wartime, not as a soldier, but as a performer, using music to raise morale. The journey never reached its intended ending, yet the melodies she introduced survived long enough to outlive almost everyone who originally heard her sing them. Number 41. Richard Kelton. Actors expect danger when performing stunts. Richard Kelton encountered it while simply using a dressing room trailer. By the late 1970s, Kelton had built a steady career through television and film appearances. He was working on the ambitious television miniseries Centennial, a large production based on James Michener's novel. During production in 1978, Kelton became ill. The cause was later identified as carbon monoxide exposure, associated with improper ventilation in a trailer being used as a dressing area. He died on November 27th at 45. The accident was frightening precisely because carbon monoxide gives so little warning. There may be no dramatic smoke, flames, or obvious mechanical failure. A person can simply become increasingly unwell without immediately understanding why. On a large production, trailers often represent safety and privacy, the place performers go between difficult scenes. For Kelton, that supposedly protected space became the danger. His death did not become a famous Hollywood legend because he was a working character actor rather than an international superstar. But production safety is not measured by fame. The incident belongs beside better-known on-set tragedies because it revealed how ordinary equipment and poor ventilation could become fatal. There was no dangerous stunt to cancel and no spectacular sequence worth debating afterward. The danger came from air nobody could see, a reminder that film sets can hide risks in the least dramatic places. Number 42. Sheridan Commerate. Western fans who watch 3:10 to Yuma or other 1950s productions may recognize Sheridan Commerate, even if his name is not immediately familiar. He belonged to the enormous class of working Hollywood actors who filled supporting roles and helped create the world surrounding bigger stars. In April 1973, Commerate was aboard a Beechcraft Queen Air traveling over New Jersey. The flight ended catastrophically when the aircraft broke apart in mid-air near Brick Township. Everyone aboard was killed. Later investigation of the circumstances raised disturbing questions about the pilot's condition and the manner in which the aircraft had reportedly been flown before the breakup. For Commerate, none of those questions could change the result. A performer who had spent years appearing in westerns, dramas, and television productions was gone at 54. Aviation appears repeatedly in Hollywood accident history because actors often traveled constantly. Locations, personal appearances, military entertainment tours, and production schedules could put performers in aircraft far more often than ordinary people of the same period. Commercial aviation gradually became extraordinarily safe, but private and smaller aircraft carried different risks. Comrade never became the household name that some actors on this list achieved, yet that does not make the ending less tragic. Classic Hollywood was built not only by stars above the title, but by thousands of recognizable working actors whose careers could vanish just as suddenly. Number 43. Roy Kinnear. By 1988, Roy Kinnear had spent decades making audiences laugh. His credits included Help, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, The Three Musketeers, and countless British television appearances. During production of The Return of the Musketeers in Spain, Kinnear was required to participate in a horseback sequence. On September 19th, he fell from the horse while filming in Toledo. The fall caused serious injuries, including a fractured pelvis and internal damage. He was taken to a hospital but died the following day after suffering heart failure connected with those injuries. He was 54. The accident deeply affected director Richard Lester, who had worked with Kinnear repeatedly. Questions were later raised about whether the actor, who was not an experienced horseman, should have been placed in the situation without greater protection or a stunt substitute. Kinnear's family eventually pursued legal action related to the circumstances. His death belongs slightly later than Hollywood's traditional golden age, but his long association with classic British and international cinema makes the case impossible to ignore when discussing performers lost to production accidents. A comedy actor whose presence made dangerous adventures feel harmless ultimately died because one of those staged adventures was not harmless enough. For his family and colleagues, the sequence never became just another piece of footage. Number 44. Janos Prohaska. You may not recognize his face, but classic television viewers almost certainly saw his work. Janos Prohaska specialized in portraying animals and unusual creatures inside elaborate costumes. During the 1960s, he appeared in productions including Star Trek, The Outer Limits, and Lost in Space. His physical performance helped make strange creatures believable long before digital effects could create them. In 1974, Prohaska traveled with a production connected with a television project called Primal Man. The group boarded an aircraft in California. The plane crashed, killing Prohaska, his son Robert, and many others aboard. It was an enormous loss of life, and one of those entertainment industry accidents rarely remembered today because no single A-list movie star dominated the headlines. Prohaska's unusual career also explains why his contribution can be overlooked. Actors hidden inside creature suits rarely receive the same recognition as the performers whose faces remain visible. Yet their movements, balance, endurance, and ability to communicate through heavy costumes were essential to pre-digital science fiction. Every time a strange ape, alien, bird, or monster appeared convincingly in a 1960s television episode, someone had to physically create that illusion. Prohaska spent years doing exactly that. His final journey had nothing to do with an elaborate stunt or creature performance. Like so many entertainment professionals before him, ordinary production travel became the most dangerous part of the job. Number 45. Jack Budlong. The final name reminds us why old movie spectacles could be far more dangerous than audiences understood. Jack Budlong worked as a stunt rider and screen performer during an era when westerns and historical epics used enormous groups of real horses, riders, wagons, weapons, and practical effects. During production associated with the cavalry epic, They Died with Their Boots On, dangerous riding sequences resulted in fatal accidents involving horsemen working on the picture. Budlong was among those who lost their lives after a horse fell during a cavalry sequence. The tragedy rarely appears when viewers discuss the finished movie. Instead, attention goes to Errol Flynn, Olivia de Havilland, the large battle scenes, and the romanticized story of George Armstrong Custer. But those spectacular images were created by real riders moving at real speed. There were no digital horses, computer-generated armies, or modern visual effects tools capable of replacing dangerous physical action. When something went wrong, the consequences could be permanent. Budlong may not have possessed the celebrity of James Dean or Carole Lombard, but ending with him feels appropriate. Hollywood history tends to remember the famous faces while forgetting the performers standing 20 feet behind them. Their work still appears on screen, Their names often do not. Behind some of classic cinema's most exciting images were people accepting physical risks that modern audiences would never know existed unless somebody finally told their stories. Hollywood could control the lights, rewrite bad dialogue, and even manufacture a star's entire public image, but it could never control what happened after the cameras stopped. Some of these legends died on roads, some in the air, some at home, and others while making the entertainment audiences loved. Which story surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments. And if you enjoy discovering the forgotten side of classic Hollywood, like the video, subscribe, and join us for the next story.